Hello and welcome to this demonstration of GreedAndFearIndex. GreedAndFearIndex is a service that analyzes and measures sentiment in the financial news and allows you to monitor how sentiment is moving and what companies are in the news. If you look at this screen, this is typically what you're met with when you sign in. The main features are all organized in these menus where you can choose what you want to do. Let's look at sentiment over time as a line graph. This allows you to filter sentiment over time based on live data or between two historical date times. You can also search by news categories and business sectors, or you can switch this and search by individual companies by naming them. For sentiment over time in particular, you also have data granularity, which is how closely spaced the data points will be in the line graph. Let's put this to 15 minutes. You can also define moving averages, which is a multiple of the data granularity. Let's put that to 16, which is 4 hours. Here you can see sentiment over time over the last 24 hours with a 4-hour moving average with data for every 15 minutes. You can see sentiment and the volume of news that we are looking at for this particular filter, technology and telecommunications. We can resize the window, we can move it around and put it wherever we like. Let's look at the scatter plot, which is another way of looking at sentiment. This is the scatter plot where each and every mention or story is plotted as a point along the time and sentiment axis. There's nothing stopping us from having multiple windows of each type with different filters defined. We can also look at sentiment distribution. Let's look at sentiment distribution over the last 24 hours in all news over all categories. This is just your regular pie chart. Hover over and you see the percentage, the number of news items. Then we can move over to data tables. Here we have a number of options. We can filter news. In other words, we can look at the actual news stories that we for different categories or companies, if you want that. We can look at the most talked about, most positively mentioned, and most negatively mentioned. If we look at the most talked about companies, let's look at a historical date range between the 27th of September and the 28th of September for technology and telecommunications. Here you see the companies in order of their frequency of mention. The frequency is how often they have been mentioned over the time period as a percentage of all organizations and all organization mentions. So here we can look at AMD. We can get a context menu, look at sentiment distribution, sentiment over time, and look at individual news for a company. So these are the news for AMD. We can click on any news story and get to the source. Or we can look at the sentiment distribution over the time frame we chose. positive and negative mentions are very similar to the most talked about. But they're ordered by two things. One is order of positive mention, if we're looking at positive mentions, how positive the sentiment is around the company. And we can also create a mention threshold that effectively filters out companies that have not been mentioned enough to be statistically relevant for whatever we're looking for. And here you see for all categories, these are the most mentioned companies, or most positively mentioned companies. Thank you, that concludes this demo.